Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I read Never Die Alone by Donald Goines. I got this recommendation through 50 Cent's book, Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter, and it led me to this urban fiction master. Donald Goines released Never Die Alone in 1974, shortly before being murdered, possibly for writing these very words. So this book displays the events of a few street players who are already embroiled in some unsavory acts. So I've constructed a family tree, kind of Donald Goines and the other authors in this genre of urban fiction writing. So I've obviously included Iceberg Slim because his book, Pimp, released in '67, directly influenced Donald Goines to write. But also we have the Sister Soldiers of the world. I know for me, I remember reading a few of her books in middle school. So maybe I was young, so 11, 12-ish. But then we have all of the nods from hip hop legends. He's been name dropped by Tupac, Ludacris, Nas, and of course 50 Cent. And in my opinion, there wouldn't be a power universe, which is now taking over at Stars, without having, the foundation in urban fiction writing from Donald Goines. So he's contributed to a lot when it comes to the culture. So his books were all released between 1971 and 1974. And I found it's because he was actually addicted to heroin. So the writing actually, the brisk output of books, it served a purpose because it was providing money, to feed his addiction. But at the same time, the more time he spent writing these books, the better, because he would avoid, his addiction. So it was an interesting relationship that I read up on when it comes to his literary career, very short, and his struggle with drug addiction. So as I mentioned before, he was killed with his wife in 1974, and it's been suggested that because some of his writing is based in real life events and figures, that he had enemies out there and they were responsible for this. Of course, we don't really know. But after reading, this book, I can see how that could be the case. Even if, let's say, it was true and some of what he included in his works were accurate in real life events, and maybe he just switched up the names. It's still, once people catch on to that stuff, and if you're one of these characters that is doing a lot of illegal things, stuff like this can be used against you, when it comes to court. So, I can totally see how he would make enemies. And that's the fine line that you toe as a writer when it comes to drawing inspiration from the real world. But I think that stuff like this, should be held in such high regard because it depicts, what was going on around him at the time. So I think it's important to have that notation of real life events, whether or not it, kind of makes people angry. It's important to preserve what's going on. So, but these books are still fiction, and there's the blurb included that it's based on true life, but classified as fiction pieces. So the structure of this book is very straightforward. Being released in 1974, it's a lot different from the books now. Mainly it's just straight 177 pages. There are 14 chapters, and that's it. And also, one thing that I think that authors should do more is include previews. Like the edition that I have, it includes, it's either 2 or 3 chapters of one of Donald Goines' other books, which is Dope Fiend. And that used to happen a lot when I was younger. Like the authors, if they had another book they published, or if it was a new book in a series, they would include a couple chapters at the end. I don't really see that often, but that could also be that I buy books like that, as soon as they come out. So maybe I just have old editions, but it's nice that he includes, some of his other work to get you excited to read more. Now, the title, of course, it specifically correlates to a lot of what our characters are going through in this book. Of the ones that do perish and die, no one technically dies alone, but when it comes to mentally, there are no allies in this plot. So I think that there's a lot of meanings to the phrase never die alone. Obviously, it's comforting to have someone by your side when you know you're about to die. But also, when it comes to preserving legacy, or even just, making sure that you are remembered, if someone just kills you in like an attack or something, you die alone in the streets, that's the end of your story. And it's likely that you will be forgotten after, someone else gets killed. So the characters that do die in this book, technically none of them die alone, but they really are alone, and it's kind of sad. Now, when it comes to perspective, this book is written in third person narration. So again, that just means, we're kind of the audience, we're kind of like birds in the sky. We can see everything, and we can also understand what the character is thinking and the motivations behind their actions. But we do follow various characters throughout the book, and it's kind of an alternating situation. So chapter 1 may be about King David, chapter 2 will be about Paul, chapter 3 will be about King David. So like that. But the good thing about that, though, is that let's say chapters 1 and 3 are about King David. Chapter 3 picks up exactly where chapter 1 left off. So there's not much you have to kind of wonder about when it comes to timeline. It's a very short, from beginning to end, it's like 1 or 2 days. So it's very small window of time. And again, there's only 14 chapters, so it goes by very fast. But I will say I did not feel like anything was left out. Like I did feel like I got a great story just within, 200 pages. The tone of this book is very gritty. So for everyone that is squeamish about certain verbiage, this is not the book for you because it is not politically correct at all. And you know what? That's integrity to the content, because the characters are street, they're vulgar, and they use, the language that they use. It's not going to be something that stands up to the social standards of 2022. And this is important because it covers these events with a clear lens. And that's almost required when it comes to understanding, the true nature of what is happening. It's not packaged up in a nice pretty bow. Like, this is some real, like, gnarly stuff. And what that means is that the core voice of this book is mirroring the streets. It's a reflection of what's really happening, hence the based on the true events thing. So being that this book is heavy when it comes to covering different characters, the majority of this episode is going to be about our characters, and I have separated them into different groups based on what they contribute to the plot, or maybe their character flaws, or how they're positioned, in the story overall. So the first grouping here is our symbolic characters, which means, obviously they symbolize something. You can gather something from them. King David and Mr. Billings are, in my opinion, they symbolize evil. King David being a more primary character than Mr. Billings. He's kind of, secondary. But David is someone I would put in the chaotic evil category because he's selfish, he's greedy. Most importantly, he has no redeeming qualities. He's borderline psychotic. Actually, he is psychotic. But through him, the audience is able to observe justice. So that's how he functions for us. But also his return in the book is the catalyst for the rest of the plot. So him showing up kind of kicks off the rest of the events that happen. And he is really just a reprehensible character all around. And it's interesting because you don't know that right away. He's kind of sneaky. His nickname is King Cobra because he's a snake. But at the beginning, you don't get the full story until really like the last few chapters. And so you're understanding his demise at the beginning because he was just such a terrible person. And this is someone who, like, and you can read in the synopsis, he put car battery acid. He mixed it with the drugs to give to some woman that had basically slighted him, turned down his advances, and she died. And so this shows you the lengths that he's willing to go for something so small. He's the type of character that when you hear women speak about catcalling and being put in very uncomfortable situations when it comes to turning guys down, this is who they're talking about. The people who can't take no, even if it's just something simple like no, you can't have my number. These are the type of people that will go off and do God knows what. But King David is really just a piece of crap, honestly. He was the worst, and he had no remorse. Again, no redeeming qualities. Sometimes I find with villains in other stories that I read or even shows that I watch, there's always something that can explain why they are the way they are. There's nuance there. There's, oh, well, they had this level of trauma in the past, so we understand how they turned out the way that they are. Now, granted, because the timeline is so short, we don't know, what happened to King David when he was a child, but he still has like the worst character traits. It's terrible, and he got what he deserved, in my opinion. So he's chaotically evil, but Mr. Billings is lawfully evil. And I say that because he runs a newspaper that is admittedly biased, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, but his driving motivator is greed. But when you kind of level him up against King David, Mr. Billings, has a legal job, but he's still, using that job for his personal gain, and he's hurting people in the process. So these two represent the two kind of one of the few faces of evil to me. Next, we have a few tertiary characters. So these are characters that are kind of in the background. If you take them out of the plot, it won't really change anything, and they really don't have any real impact on the main storylines. So for example, Brenda and Nancy, I would categorize them as true neutral. Again, they're people that their actions aren't really affecting the plot at all. They just kind of are there to move the story along. And these two are motivated by normal things like making sure their bills are paid or making sure they can feed their kids. So that's just one example. And to give you guys even more information on how kind of not important they are, these two characters weren't really in the movie. And so usually you can tell, like when a book either is adapted to a film or a series, they usually cut out these types of characters because it's not really necessary. I mean, you can have them in there, but not having them won't really change anything. And then also we have Rocky and Alvin, who again are in the same type of situation, but they are lawfully evil because they're the type of soldiers or pawns that they follow their orders, lawfully, but they're working for a drug lord. So they're clearly in the evil category, but they also can be described as static, meaning there's no change in their motivation throughout the book. There's no change in their character traits or their perspectives. At the beginning of the book, they were soldiers that obeyed every order. At the end, they did the same. Next, we're going to talk about Mike, who I would categorize as a round character, which essentially means that there is room for him to grow. So he's not a static character. The events in the plot do affect him, and it changes his motivations a little bit and his allegiances. So he's someone who has room to grow, but he's also chaotically good. Again, he's running around with the drug lord, hence the chaotic part, but he's really in it for vengeance, to avenge his mother. So, his reasonings are sound, but he's going about it the wrong way. He's another one of these pawns, but he is one that is emotionally unhinged, especially when it comes to what happened to his family. So he has this wrath within him that, leads him to do some very stupid things that lead to his downfall. Second to last, we have Paul here, who is to me a foil character. So he's someone who is completely opposite of the majority of the characters in this book, but mainly King David, because these are the two that interact with each other the most throughout the book. And so he is someone who is lawfully good. He always does the right thing. He went out of his way to help David once he was stabbed, and he didn't even know who he was. So this is someone who is morally sound. He's in a great position, especially compared to everyone around him. And he also turned down the job with Mr. Billings because he wasn't willing to, give up his morals in order to get a paycheck, even though he needed it very, very much. And lastly, Moon. So Moon is what we call the ruler. He's someone who has a position of power, and he's motivated by his pride, essentially. He's neutrally evil. And I say that because, again, he's a drug lord, but he doesn't really have like nefarious intentions as far as I know. He doesn't really seem too intelligent or witty. He's just someone who obviously got to that position by, doing whatever he needs to do, and he's willing to protect his reputation. But it doesn't sound like when you talk about these other characters, like these drug lords and things like that, it doesn't really seem like he has a code or, a moral compass, but he's also not unhinged. So he's definitely in the evil category, but I would also put him in the neutral. Okay, so the most logical theme here is consequences, the reaction to, things that are happening, which by definition is an act following something as a result. King David, obviously, his character flaw is that he is a sneaky snake. He 2 times everyone around him. Basically for money. I was trying to think of another reason, but really it's just for money. And that's the thing with this character as well. It's not really clear what he wants out of life except to hit this mark of $50,000. To do what with? We don't know, and we never find out. But his journey included him thinking that once he got to that point of making all that money by, basically screwing over everyone else, that he could go back and pay off all of the people that he wronged and just be done with it. But what he finds out is that vengeance is more important and impactful and lasting than money. He's thinking, oh, okay, well, I scammed this guy out of $100. I'll come back a few years later and give him $500 and be done with it. No, especially for people like Moon who run on pride, you cannot just let that humiliation go. Those actions are going to be dealt with swiftly, and if not swiftly, severely. Now, vengeance is a powerful motivator for our characters that are engaged in like the offensive. And this is because they're trying to find retribution for their past hurt. And this is the only way they know how, is through, violence. So what we see here is a cycle of interaction. Human interaction is, very simple, especially when it comes to conflicts. There's something that happens initially, then there's a reaction to it. And after that reaction, there is a result. After that result, someone else is pissed off, so they engage in another action, and so on. So this is just a cycle of hurt that's going on and on and on. And the second thing that was kind of surprising was writing. When it comes to the Evening Star, that's the paper that Mr. Billings is the head of, they actively skewed information to confirm the bias of their readers. So they publish stories that will cater to the hate that their Southern white readers had for Black people. So really, the writing for them represented a vehicle of hate, but also for them, monetary gain. Whereas with King David's journal, it acted as a vehicle of influence because he was trying to craft his image after death. I think deep down he knew that he was coming towards the end of his road very quickly, and that's why he was keeping that journal. And whether or not he intended for a lot of people to read it or one person to read it, he was still trying to tell his story. He wanted his story to be told. And that's kind of why he didn't want to be left to die by himself. But whatever, writing is used for, we have to all understand that words drive power, they drive influence, they drive money sometimes, and reputation and legacy. And our characters used it to their advantage. And also Donald Goines, writing his stuff, it cemented his legacy, but it also kind of pissed off a few people clearly. So, and only one motif for this, which is class, and that's because we see this interesting parallel between the Jewish religion and the Black race, because Paul is of Jewish descent and he actually saw his parents being persecuted during World War II. And so he has a very high standard of morals when it comes to things like that. And now he's living in this urban city, living in a low income zone surrounded by Black people who we all know in America are kind of treated, especially during this time, as second class citizens. And so he has this mutual respect for the people around him. And it's almost jarring because it's almost like race isn't really the topic of this book, because it's just like Paul is like, they're people, let's get to it, let me get my job done and, be done with it. But it is a interesting commentary on treating people like they are less than, and how Paul came from this background of witnessing that horrific genocide firsthand to now being interviewed for a job at a newspaper where they are actively contributing to the inflamed hatred of Black people. And so he was like, yeah, I'm not with that. And that's just him taking, a high road, because he could put himself in that position to kind of be above someone, but he chose not to. So the film adaptation, which if you are interested, you can see, I rented it on YouTube, because some of these book to movie adaptations are a little bit older. They're not going to be on like Netflix, but usually you can find them on like Amazon Prime or YouTube or somewhere, and you can rent it for like $3 or $4. And I think once you rent it, you have like a month to watch it. And it was pretty short. It was about an hour and a half, but I watched it on YouTube. And first of all, DMX is casted as David, and his narration is fantastic. 20 seconds in, I was hooked, because he has a cadence about his voice that even when he's not rapping, you want to listen to him tell the story. And he did a great job. I think he's always good in his acting roles. He's someone that was clearly, gifted when it came to entertaining, both rapping and acting. I think his portrayal of David also encompassed the grit and the carelessness of David, as a character. He was a piece of work, and they definitely showed that very well in the film. His charisma also came across very well. But Michael Ealy, was in this book as Mike. Oh my gosh. Michael Ealy is a fantastic actor, but he is fine. He's always been fine. So if you need any reason to really watch it, that can be your reason right there. But it was a really good movie. I enjoyed it. There were slight adjustments for plot purposes, so minor characters were cut, but there were also story outcomes that were manipulated. However, the concept and the impact remains the same, so you can still come away from the movie with the same understanding of the themes and the character motivations. It's just that they tweaked a little bit in there, so it ended slightly differently. I would say this is a hood classic. This is up there again with all of those other urban fiction writers. I felt like it was like, this is like The Wire before The Wire. You know what I mean? That's the type of vibe it's giving. Now, it was a quick read. I think all of his books, in my opinion, should be made into like a series, whether they do like a series per book, because they could really do like an episode on each chapter, because again, it's following a different character. Or if you take all of his books together and just do one episode per book, I think they should do that, because this is something that it certainly has an audience, and it's good. It's good material. Is this a reread? Of course. And I am currently bolstering my Goines collection as we speak. I'm going to try to get all of them at once, so I can, read the rest of them. I want to say it was like 14 or 16 books or something like that. Again, he wrote all of these within a small time period, so it's not that many books. And if they're all short like this, I can easily read them all. So, and my only takeaway from this, in the words of Miss Lauryn Hill, there's so much crisis in the world because you reap what you sow. So be very careful about who you are out here doing wrong, who you are out here screwing over and talking crazy to. Just going about your business, stay gracious, and understand that karma is real. So that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I will see you next week. Thank you.